going to get to hear from San Francisco, who we heard from a few years ago about one of their excellent programs, and they've come back and they have another one on financial justice, which is a really important program. Jose Cisneros, who's the treasurer of the city of San Francisco.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Cisneros, San Francisco treasurer and tax collector. It's usually the popular part of the title. Fines and fees are a fundamental part of government. Fines serve as consequences for breaking rules, and fees help governments underwrite their own costs. But for low-income people, and particularly for people of color, fines and fees can become predatory. They can push people into a financial hole they cannot climb out of. Research shows that governments and courts are becoming more reliant on fines and fees from Ferguson, Missouri to California. But before we tell you about the Financial Justice Project, let me tell you about two local women we've met, Mary and Pamela. After Mary's time in jail, she got clean from her addiction, found a new job, and reunited with her daughter. She did everything right. But she was stunned when she received a bill for $1,800 to pay up front for 3 years of probation fees. Pamela is a disabled citizen who got her car towed for the first time. The tow cost $412, half of her monthly income from Social Security. She paid it, but then she couldn't make rent and faced eviction. These women share a common dilemma. They struggle to pay government fines and fees they cannot afford. And they're not alone. Half of Americans cannot come up with $400 to pay for an emergency expense. When people cannot pay, consequences can set in. In San Francisco, we heard about people who had their driver's license suspended because they couldn't pay traffic tickets, and then they lost their jobs. We heard about homeless people given $200 tickets for sleeping on the sidewalk, which grew to $500 when left unpaid. We heard about fines snowballing with late fees and credit scores going down. These consequences had dramatic impacts. Some lives were ruined. I'm the treasurer. I know we can balance our books in a way that is not on the backs of the poor, and that these reforms can work better for government too. There are some fees that actually cost more to collect than they bring in. So how did we learn this, and what have we done about it? My colleague Ann Stuhldreher will tell you.
Thank you. In late 2016, we launched the Financial Justice Project, and we have two main jobs. First, we listened to community members to identify the biggest fine and fee pain points, and then we identified doable solutions for government and the courts. We've advanced a range of reforms. Sometimes we base a fine or fee on someone's ability to pay, because the research shows that when you proportion a fine to someone's income, they can pay more easily. Revenue can actually increase. Sometimes we offer a pathway to accountability that doesn't require a money payment, and sometimes we eliminate fees that just don't make sense. For example, we cut tow and boot fees in half for lower income people like Pamela. Also, we created a special low-income payment plan for people to pay off parking tickets. Previously, people were charged $60 to get on a payment plan. When we implemented the new low-income payment plan, signups increased by 400%. Revenue for the city went up too. We've introduced ability to pay processes in the courts, and we've stopped suspending driver's licenses for people's inability to pay. No one should lose a job for something like getting a parking ticket or a traffic ticket. And earlier this year, San Francisco became the first to eliminate all local criminal justice administrative fees, like a $50 monthly probation fee or a $35 a day fee to rent an electronic ankle monitor. These fees are high pain for people, but they're low gain for government. The collection rate on the largest fee was just 9%. Last month, we stood on the steps of City Hall with Mayor London Breed and announced that we were writing off $32 million in debt from these fees that were hanging over 21,000 people. This is debt that we would never collect and would never come in, but it was hitting people like Mary right when they were getting back on their feet. Financial justice reforms like these that hold people accountable but do not put them in financial distress can work better for government. We're the nation's first effort embedded in government to assess and reform fines and fees that disproportionately impact struggling residents, but we know we won't be the last. A group of Chicago mothers are working with officials there to start a financial justice effort. We're getting calls from cities all over the country, and the National League of Cities and PolicyLink are launching efforts too. Government should be an equalizer of opportunity and not another driver of inequality. Thank you.
So I'll start it off. First, thanks for what you're doing. It's absolutely wonderful. The question is, there's got to be hundreds of different genesis points of fines and fees, and if you are putting together a model for this program that can, go to other places, how would an entity know where to look? Is there a model to sort of get people started?
We started this effort with a 6-month task force, the Fines and Fees Task Force, because I think you're exactly right. The landscape in every city, county, and particularly every state, very likely is quite different from everywhere else. So we actually combined in this task force members of our community, legal aid folks, defense attorneys, as well as government leaders, district attorney, public defender, sheriff, the mayor's office, and all of us together talked about what was going on. So that really helped describe the landscape of where the harmful fees were impacting folks. And I will follow that up with what it also really showed to us is that many of us on the government side, were very unaware of the unintended consequences that many of these fines and fees were creating. And so one of the great things that Ann and the team worked on was to work actually with our mayor's budget office to create a citywide inventory of all of our fines and fees to really get to the essence of what are they for, who's paying them, and what's the impact we're seeing.
On the, so again, similar to a question I asked earlier, what was the genesis of this? The two individuals you mentioned, people complain. Somebody's complaining right now, I'm sure, in San Francisco or Philadelphia that, the sun is too hot, it's too cold, it's wet, whatever. People complain about all kinds of stuff. So the genesis question is the one, and the second is on the politics of this. You're talking about writing off, on the one hand, $23 million taxpayer money that you were never going to collect in the first place, but how was that received out in the public? Because, I understand that dilemma.
Can I just say something about the genesis? So we have a legacy of doing what we call financial empowerment programs. We've been steering low-income people away from predatory actors in our community for a long time. If you don't have a bank account, we don't want you going to a check casher getting ripped off. We want you to have a bank account. We want kids in our school district to save for college. We want to provide counselors to low-income folks to help them get their books in order. That work educated us a lot about what is happening in our community, but what Ann and others really helped us understand is where are we, the government, impacting people in a way that can turn predatory, and that really was the genesis of where we were coming from.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say there was also a coalition of community groups that had formed called Debt Free SF, and they were calling out, people getting their license suspended because they couldn't pay traffic tickets, and then they were losing or couldn't get a job. Homeless people getting tickets, people exiting jail with all these fees, and it just didn't make sense.
Right. It's the ripple effect.
Exactly. And so again, we really thought that we could do better if we brought everybody around the table to develop, better solutions.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
Go ahead.
sure. So there's essentially two narratives here. There's a fiscal narrative in terms of how much money you're saving, collecting, and then there's a moral narrative in terms of the impact of these fines and fees on people's lives, the devastating effect. How are you using data to tell both those stories? So to the extent that there's a legislative response, right, in terms of getting rid of fines and fees that may be, a next step, particularly elsewhere? How are you using data to tell both those stories?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, we really use data both to understand the impacts and then to understand the costs. And again, a lot of times the people at the table and the decision makers did not come up with the idea for these fines and fees. And when they see, how they are high pain, low gain, and how the collection rates on the one hand are so low, but then you look at the human toll, and just to hear from people directly affected by these. I mean, last week I was sitting with our public defender's office and a gentleman whose Social Security check was being garnished. He was, in his 70s for something that happened 20 years ago. This doesn't make sense. And so I think it's both of those real human experiences and this data that point us both in the same direction for reform.
So in terms of the data, having a profile of essentially, people who are captives of these fines and fees, like a data profile, a person looks like this, they go through these kinds of challenges. Do you have that kind of data?
That's a great question. The data, to be honest, a lot of times has been very hard to get, and incomplete. Like what is we know what our collection rate is, what's the outstanding debt, and what does that mean for people? How many people have had their credit scores impacted? How many people have had their driver's license suspended? We have some of that, but through this process, we've been able to learn the importance of gathering that data, and sometimes it takes a while and it takes a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of cross-collaboration between the counties, courts, and the city, but we can get a better picture. I wouldn't say we have the perfect picture yet.
Sure, thank you.
One of the solutions you've come up with is ability to pay. How do you determine that?
Sure. So with the eligibility for the discounted towing or the low-income payment plan, it's set at 200% of poverty, which is also tied to about the same kind of eligibility rates for SNAP, food stamps, or the upper range on Medi-Cal. And we also wanted to do that because, again, we heard from departments first we wanted to really reach the people that needed help in San Francisco, and that I think phases out about $50,000 for a family of 4. We also heard from departments that they want it to be easy to tell who is eligible for these low-income discounts. So now at the MTA, or if your car's towed, you can show your food stamps or your SNAP card. We also heard from a lot of departments that wanted to offer discounts, but again, they didn't want to be collecting pay stubs or figure out, who's eligible. So we have worked with our Human Services Agency to develop an income verification system because they have qualified so many people for means-tested benefits. Now the MTA can type in someone's name and they can learn if that person is at 100% or 200% of the federal poverty level, and they can offer a corresponding discount.
So it sounds to me like the previous determination of eligibility by another program is your principal method of determining eligibility.
Yes, that is correct, but if we know that not everybody who is eligible for these programs actually participates, so there are ways that people can show their income eligibility at the courts or at the MTA where they can get that certified.
And, can you describe again why by lowering the fee you raise more money?
It's pretty amazing, really. We clearly understand how if people don't have money, they can't afford a $200 or a $400 or a $500 payment. But what we found was that when you cut that in half, A lot of people want to do the right thing. A lot of people want to pay. So what happened was, when we actually cut those costs in half, I think the number of people paying went up by 400%.
Yeah, and I can describe specifically at the MTA.
I mean,
so-
that's a stunning statistic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so-
I think it should teach a lot of people about what the fee should be,
Yeah.
which people will pay if they get actually more money if they make it a lower fee.
More
So it's so interesting because when you cut that $60 payment to
Yeah.
get on a payment plan,
Yeah.
and then they also cut the late fees, which double the price of the ticket, it gave people a sense that they could actually pay.
Yeah.
So for instance, I was just a few weeks ago speaking with this woman, Dana, who was unfortunately living in her car,
Right.
had racked up a bunch of tickets. It was about to get towed. She needed that car to work to get to catering jobs. With this program, she was able to, get her bill about cut in half and then get on a payment plan and have longer to pay. So she started paying. If you make it easier for people to pay, they will pay.
Thank you. For the second time, I've made you go over. Thank you very much.